Hello, everyone. This is Kathy. And I'm here today with a journal technique must-do list. And what it'll be the things that I typically try to put in my journals, the techniques I try to use. 4 years ago when I began this junk journal journey, I watched Gail Agostinelli's YouTube channel, and she had a list of her must-haves, a list of 10 must-haves for her journal. I adapted that long ago and have 16 journal must-haves. And these are things when I get stuck that kind of jar my creative juices and allow me to think of things to put into my journal. And these are things like full page pockets, vertical and horizontal belly bands, corner tucks, bookmarks, bags, etc., etc. I do have a YouTube video on this back 4 years ago. I'll link it, and it'll give you samples of each of these. This was so helpful to me when I first started out, because when I first started out, I almost felt paralyzed. Like I had all the stuff, but I didn't know where to begin. I was bombarded with so many videos that I had watched, etc., and didn't know where to begin. So this really helped me, and I always thank Gail Agostinelli for that. Now today I'm veering off a little bit from my journal must-haves to my journal technique must-dos, because now I'm at a point 4 years later where I have a good understanding of what I put in my journal. But now I also want to include techniques I want to remember to use in my journal. It doesn't mean I have to use every technique, but it allows me to really kind of look at a menu and pick those techniques that I either use sometimes or I forget to use, and this really helps me. So I'm going to start out with choosing papers. And in choosing papers, when I choose papers for my journal, I consider the weight of the paper. I like to have a variety of weights. So I like to use cardstock, copy paper, book page, tracing paper. So I like to use heavy and light papers, thin and thick papers, because I like the feel of those papers as I use my journal. I like to consider the size of the papers, not only the regular size that would fit in my journal that I'm making, but I also like to have smaller sizes, maybe a strip of paper. I also like to consider the uniqueness of papers. I want to be sure to include some sort of doilies, deli paper, envelopes, parchment papers, and maybe overhead transparencies. So to begin with that, I'm going to show you some of the papers that I use in my personal journals. I use papers from Digis that I've collected. I use journal papers, copy papers. I use different types of papers. This was from an old theater program. Let's see what else I have. I have some overhead transparencies that I've printed on. They make very interesting papers because you can see through them. I use book pages, and maybe they're a smaller size than the regular journal. I love that. Little pieces of note paper, ledger paper, So all kinds of papers like that. Okay, let's move on to the next grouping. So that, oh, and the way I choose my papers, I collect group of cardstock, group of digis, groups of copy paper, book page, tracing papers, different size papers, and envelopes, kind of a specialty grouping. And what I do is I end up with about 5 groups of papers. And I decide how many signatures I'm going to have. Let's say I'm going to have 2 signatures. Then I decide I'm going to put in 3 pieces from each of the stacks. That would give me about 15 pages in each signature. Maybe I put 4 pieces. So that's my consideration in how I use the papers. Next, I considered paper modifications. So, I consider using texture paste, embossing and die cutting, stencils, embossing glaze, powders, paints, and inks. Again, let's look at my journal, and I have some examples. I have, instead of die cuts in mine, let me show you what I have. I have places where I've cut out, looks like a die cut, but I've cut out the digi paper and backed it so it looks like a die cut, but it really gives a nice 3D. I've added a little bit of stenciling, not much. You don't have to do a lot to make to give it some extra interest. I always use some type of inks on my papers. Here's another example of a cutout. I've been using cutouts lately, fussy cutouts. More stenciling. In this particular one, I did not use any embossing glazes that I can see. Okay, but you get the gist. You want variety. And the reason I'm putting these in the beginning, because typically I put together my papers first. I add embossing to my papers first. I stencil my papers after I've put them in signatures usually. And I do my inking before I put them in. So, those are some of the things having to do with papers and my choice of papers. Next, I'm going to look at hardware and the use of hardware in my journals. And I love to use eyelets, brads, buttons, chains, bottle caps, charms, and odd recycled pieces. Now, I don't use all of these in every journal. I usually do try to use some sort of eyelets or brads in my journals. Some sort of charms I try to put in all my journals. So let's see how I did that in this journal. I started out with charms on the front. Right away it adds some interest. And I put them on only with some bulb pins. I used eyelets down the front of the cover. And here, where my initials are. let's see, more eyelets. More eyelets. You see, I like to use eyelets. More charms. I put these on a hidden paper clip that really serves as a tab. More charms. More eyelets. And here's a tab I put on the edge of a cluster. Stuck a big charm in it. So you see pretty much, I don't think I used any brads in this one. Sorry for the sound of that lawnmower. I don't know if you can hear it. And of course my clasps for the closure, more hardware. And tabs I already showed you. I like to use generic tabs, clusters, fabric, ribbon, or lace. Pretty much for the tabs in here, I used a few, and then I used some charms in eyelets. And you don't have to use a lot of tabs, just every so often to give it some interest. Let's put that back, that back. Now I always like to include some interactive elements. Things that when going through the journal I can flip up, look at, something that makes it interesting. So those include flip outs, any 3D layering that I can add makes it interesting, some hidden writing spots, any sort of windows and frames, and the use of punches. So let's see what I did in my journal, this journal. I definitely have flip outs and frames with pictures. And let's pull that out of there. I use the little pocket here. I also like to include interactive pockets. You know, something that says, oh, there's another pocket, there's another pocket, oh, to make it interesting. Another flip outs. This makes it interesting because it makes it look 3D. Again. Sewing things on that provide texture. And that's what the different papers do as well. It provides a different type of texture to your journal, which is always interesting. This flips up. Lots of interaction here. And that lets you know how I use some interactive elements. And and sewing. I use hand, machine, or even faux sewing. In this particular journal, I used machine sewing. So, as you can see, even in the back, even though this is grungy, I'd sewed this on using a zigzag stitch. I'd sewed some different elements. And then lots of different types of belly bands. This is a double belly band, so I could actually put a couple of things in here, which I haven't done. I'm kind of saving it to add something. This is a unique interactive belly band, which has secret writing spots in it. So there's all sorts of ways to add interest to your journals using various techniques. More interactive pockets, more belly bands. This is also a double belly band. You have it here and you have one in the back. So, what I encourage you to do, if you're interested, is create your own kind of technique must-do. This will grow as my techniques grow, as I'm able to do more and more techniques. I lean more towards a grungier type of journal. But maybe, you know, I have made some that aren't so grungy. And this would definitely help me in that. So I encourage you to make your own list and use it. And if you're not at the point where you have a menu of techniques, go ahead and you make your menu must-haves of things you want to include in your journal. And start with maybe 5 items at a time. Don't be overwhelmed. Okie doke. Well, thank you for watching, and good luck on your journaling and your journal creating. You have a great day. Bye.